Julian didn't ask me like a husband asks a wife. He asked me like a judge hands down a sentence, calm and certain, like my body had been built for his family's emergencies, like my life was already stamped with their last name in invisible ink. "Prove your loyalty," he said, holding my hands in both of his, eyes soft enough to fool a starving heart. "My mother will die without this. You're the only match. You're the only one who can save her." And because I'd spent my whole life learning that love is something you earn by bleeding for it, I nodded before my fear even caught up. I told myself this was the price of belonging. I told myself a woman with no parents, no siblings, no childhood home to run back to should be grateful for any door that opened, even if it opened into a cage. I told myself that sacrifice was a language rich families understood, the only one that could translate an orphan into family. So I agreed. I signed paper after paper, my name written in neat, obedient loops, and I climbed onto that gurney like it was a vow. Before I tell you what happened 4 days later, the day he walked into my hospital room and dropped divorce papers onto my chest, I need you to understand something about me. I grew up in the kind of silence that trains you to accept crumbs. I lost my parents on Interstate 75 outside Atlanta when I was 9. A semi-truck slammed into our car so fast my father didn't even have time to swerve. I remember the scream of metal, the way the world flipped, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. I remember my mother's hand slipping from mine, and then there was nothing but the wail of sirens and strangers' voices above me like I was already underground. One day I had my mother's hands, always warm, always smelling like cocoa butter, and my father's laughter on Sunday mornings when he'd toss me up toward the ceiling and catch me at the last second, making me feel like falling could be safe. The next day I had a state-run foster home in Macon with iron cots lined like a barracks, echoing hallways that swallowed your footsteps, and staff who rotated every 6 months and never bothered to remember your name because remembering you made it harder to forget you when you aged out. In the system, you learn rules that don't get written down. You learn to smile even when you're hungry. You learn not to ask for extra, because extra makes people resent you. You learn to say thank you for things you didn't deserve to be deprived of in the first place. You learn that adults love you best when you're quiet, when you're convenient, when you don't remind them you exist. By the time I turned 18, I could fold myself smaller than my own shadow. I got a community college degree in accounting because it offered a housing subsidy because in my world, education wasn't a dream, it was shelter. I didn't pick numbers because I loved them. I picked them because numbers didn't judge your past, and because a roof is a roof, even when the walls are thin. After graduation, I tried to land an entry-level job. I wore my only blazer and practiced my answers in the mirror. I shook hands. I smiled. I watched hiring managers glance at the foster care history on my paperwork, and I watched their faces shift into polite pity, the kind that promises, "We'll call you," and never does. Eventually, I moved to Atlanta and found work as a consultant in a high-end boutique in Buckhead. It wasn't glamorous, just long hours, aching feet, and customers who treated kindness like a service they were owed. But I was surrounded by beautiful things: silk scarves, cashmere wraps, jewelry behind glass, perfume that smelled like lives I'd never lived. Sometimes I'd smooth fabric between my fingers and pretend fate might notice me one day and decide I'd suffered enough. That's where Julian Vane found me. He didn't walk into the boutique like a man shopping. He walked in like a man inspecting. Tall, polished, confident, the kind of confidence that comes from never checking your bank account before you swipe a card. He spent an hour sorting through scarves, holding one up, dismissing it, choosing another, as if the right gift wasn't about love but about control. I helped him without pushing the most expensive options, even though I could have used the commission. I didn't flatter him. I didn't shrink. I treated him like a person, and that, apparently, was rare enough to make him stare a second too long. "Do you always speak so calmly?" he asked, the corner of his mouth lifting. "How else should I speak?" I said, and surprised myself with the honesty. People either flatter or look down. I try to do neither. He paid with a black card that looked like it had never heard the word declined. Then he came back the next day for a scarf we didn't even have in stock. Then again, just to talk, to stand near the counter while I organized the new collection. A month later, He invited me to dinner at a restaurant I'd only seen in magazines, menus without prices, dishes I didn't know how to pronounce, wine glasses that made me scared to move my hands too fast. He asked me questions like my answers mattered. He listened like he was collecting details. "Are you truly alone?" he asked that night, covering my hand with his, thumb stroking my knuckles. "No family left," I said. "No one." "We can fix that," he whispered. Those words hit me like a warm blanket and a trap at the same time. I didn't know which it was. Or maybe I did, and I chose warmth anyway. We married 6 months later in a small courthouse ceremony outside the city. Julian said his mother didn't like wasting money on spectacle. I told myself the size of the wedding didn't matter. I told myself what mattered was that I finally had a home, a husband, a family. I also told myself I could endure the cold gaze of Beatrice Vane, Julian's mother, the way she looked at me like I was a stain someone forgot to scrub out. She never missed a chance to remind me I wasn't from their world. She said words like background the way people say infection. In their estate in Alpharetta, I walked softly down hallways like a guest who might be thrown out if she opened the refrigerator without permission. But I worked harder. I tried harder. I cooked dinners from elaborate recipes. Beatrice barely tasted them before pushing her plate away with a grimace. I bought her gifts, perfume, jewelry, wraps, things that vanished into the depths of her closet like I'd never given them at all. I smiled when she called me her charity case in front of guests, because I believed love was something you earn, and I was willing to earn it with my spine if I had to. Then Beatrice got sick. Chronic kidney failure. Dialysis 3 times a week at a private clinic, the kind with soft chairs and quiet music and nurses who spoke in gentle tones because rich people don't like harsh sounds. Her health declined fast. Her heart weakened. Doctors in expensive offices shook their heads. The transplant wait list would take years, they said, and she didn't have years. She had months, maybe weeks. That's when Julian brought out the performance. He dropped to his knees on cold tile, right there in the kitchen, and took my hands like a man begging for a miracle. "I know what I'm asking," he said, voice trembling. "I know it's too much. But you're the only one who can save her." He told me he'd checked my medical records because of that physical I'd done months ago, because he'd asked the doctors to test for a match just in case. He said I was a perfect match. 1 in 1,000. I stared at him, my mind buzzing like a swarm. "What about you?" I asked, voice rough. "You're her son. Why not you?" He pulled out a medical report covered in stamps and signatures. "Incompatible," he said. "I was tested first. Do you think I would ask this of you, if I could do it myself?" He spoke like a man wounded by the very suggestion. I'd give her both my kidneys if I could. The abbreviations meant nothing to me. The Latin terms might as well have been prayers. But I believed him, because I wanted to believe him. Because I'd spent my whole life hoping people were fundamentally good. Because the thought that my husband could lie about something like this felt too ugly to hold. And Julian didn't stop there. For 3 days, he pressed, wrapped me in attention, flooded me with affection until I forgot what pressure felt like and started calling it love. Coffee in bed. His hand stroking my hair. His voice soft in the dark. "After this," he whispered, "you'll truly be part of the family. Not just a name on paper, blood and flesh. My mother will love you like her own daughter. I swear it." He promised Bora Bora afterward. "An entire month. You deserve the best, Imani," he said. "You've worked so hard." And the truth is, that promise was more powerful than any logic. Not because of Bora Bora. Not because of luxury. But because he said the words I had wanted to hear since I was 9 years old. "You're not alone. You belong." So on the 3rd day, I said yes. "Fine," I whispered. "I'll do it." Julian pulled me close, face buried in my hair. He held me like I was precious, like I was saving his world, like he didn't know he was about to gut mine. The day before surgery, I sat in the chief of medicine's office, signing documents. Informed consent, waivers, protocols, page after page. My head throbbed from lack of sleep. The lines blurred. Julian stood beside me, voice casual, businesslike, pointing to one clause. Standard formality, he said. Backup plan. All hospitals require it. I read it without absorbing it. Something about what happens if the primary recipient becomes medically unfit at the last moment. Something about the organ being used for another patient on the registry. It felt distant, irrelevant. All I could think about was waking up afterward and seeing Beatrice's face softened by gratitude. Hearing her finally say thank you. Feeling, for once, like my existence had value beyond usefulness. I signed. The next morning they wheeled me down the hall on a gurney. The lights above melted into one long white streak, pulsing with my heartbeat. Julian walked beside me holding my hand. I'll be waiting, he promised at the operating room doors. The moment you wake up, I'll be there. My face will be the first thing you see. I wanted to say something like, please don't let this be a mistake. But the doors closed, and anesthesia pulled me under like a dark tide. When I woke up, I woke into the wrong world. The ceiling wasn't pristine white. It was gray with uneven patches of old paint. I wasn't in a private suite with a view. I was in a ward with 4 beds lined up, a television droning a game show, a man coughing by the window like his lungs were tearing. Pain hit my left side in thick waves, heavy and cruel, growing worse with every breath. I tried to move, and my body refused. I felt a tube under my hand, a drainage line disappearing beneath gauze. The foreignness of it made me nauseous. My mouth was dry. My throat burned. Where was Julian? He promised he'd be there. He promised his face would be the first thing I saw. Hours passed. Then a day. Then another. Nurses came and went. I asked vague questions. They gave vague answers. Pain medication fogged my thoughts, but one thing remained sharp as glass, the emptiness where Julian should have been. By the 4th day after surgery, I was starting to wonder if something had gone catastrophically wrong, if Beatrice had died, if Julian couldn't face me, if my sacrifice had been pointless. I was lying there staring at that ugly ceiling when the door finally opened. Julian walked in first. Tailored navy suit. Perfect hair. Calm face. Like he'd just come from a meeting, not from a woman missing an organ. And he was not alone. Beside him stood a woman in a deep red dress that flowed like blood. Tall. Smooth. Beautiful, in the kind of way that looks expensive and practiced. Her hand rested lightly on Julian's arm like it belonged there, like she'd done it for years. Behind them, a nurse pushed Beatrice in a wheelchair, draped in cashmere like a queen visiting her subject. Julian didn't ask how I felt. He didn't kiss my forehead. He didn't even look like a man seeing his wife in pain. He stepped to my bedside and tossed a brown envelope onto my chest. The paper hit me like a slap. "This is for you," he said, voice polite and empty, like I was a waitress who'd brought the wrong order. My hands shook as I opened it. My vision blurred. Divorce papers. Filed 3 days ago. The very day I was on the operating table. My stomach turned. My throat tightened so hard I could barely pull air. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why?" "I did everything you asked. Everything." Beatrice leaned forward in her chair, eyes bright with something that was not relief, not gratitude, something sharp and delighted. "You did," she said. "At least you were good for that." Her mouth twisted into a sneer. "Did you honestly think my son married you for love? A foster kid with nothing? No family to ask where you went if you disappeared." Her words landed one by one like stones thrown at a drowning person. "You were needed because you were a match. And because you had no one to ask questions." The monitor beside my bed began to beep faster, but I barely heard it over the roar in my ears. The woman in red stepped closer, smiling like she was greeting someone beneath her. A diamond the size of a marble sparkled on her ring finger. "My name is Sienna," she said. "Sienna Thorne. Julian and I have been together since college." Her voice was sweet. Her eyes were cruel. While I was building my career in London, he found a temporary replacement with the right biological parameters. Temporary replacement. As if I was a spare part. She placed a hand on her stomach with a slow, deliberate gesture, simple, vicious. The future heir is right here, she said softly. We planned this marriage over a year ago. As soon as Beatrice was diagnosed, Julian nodded once, curtly, confirming it like a business deal. And right then, in that moment, with tubes in my body and pain in my side and divorce papers on my chest, I understood the truth so clearly it almost felt like peace. I had never been a wife. I had been a solution. I tried to push myself up, but pain sliced through me like a hot wire. Tears spilled down my cheeks, not because I wanted to cry, but because my body couldn't hold the shock. 10,000, Julian said, dropping a stack of bills on the bedside table like a tip. Enough for a studio deposit while you recover. Sign without a fight. We leave on good terms. I stared at the money, then at the papers, then at the woman in red. And something inside me, something that had been trained since childhood to accept crumbs, split open. I'm going to the police, I rasped. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just smiled like a man who knew the game was rigged. Tell them what? That you signed informed consent? Voluntarily, Imani. That's the key word. Voluntary. No coercion. No pressure. We have your signature on every page. Beatrice waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Let's go, she said. It smells like bleach and poverty in here. They turned to leave Julian, Beatrice, Sienna, walking away like I was already garbage. And that's when a doctor's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. Who authorized subjecting a post-op patient to this kind of stress? He demanded. She's 4 days out from a nephrectomy. The trio froze. The doctor stepped in fully, eyes flashing with disgust as he glanced at my tear-streaked face, then at the divorce papers, then at Julian. Mr. Vane, I presume? Julian straightened, trying to pull arrogance back onto his shoulders. Doctor, this is a family matter. We were just leaving. A family matter, the doctor repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a crime. Then he paused. And in that pause, for the first time since waking up, I felt something flicker inside me. Small, dangerous, alive. I'm afraid I have news for you, the doctor said, voice steady. For all of you. He looked at Beatrice, then Julian, then Sienna. And he said the sentence that made Julian's face drain of color, that made Beatrice clutch her chest, that made Sienna's smile crack like glass. Your mother's transplant was cancelled. I turned my head slowly on the pillow, pain blazing, heart pounding, because suddenly the universe had shifted, and Julian still didn't know the most important thing. For a second, nobody moved. Not Julian. Not Beatrice. Not Sienna in her blood-red dress. Even the air in the room felt like it stopped breathing. The only thing that kept going was the monitor beside my bed, beeping fast and sharp, like it was warning the world that something in me had just been pushed too far. What do you mean, cancelled? Beatrice's voice rose into a shrill, offended screech, the kind of sound a woman makes when she's used to doctors obeying her, when she's used to money fixing whatever breaks. I'm here. I'm ready. I'm on the list. My surgery was scheduled. The doctor didn't flinch. He wore that expression I'd seen on nurses sometimes, the look of a person who has dealt with wealthy cruelty so often they've learned to keep their face calm while their stomach burns. Mrs. Vane, he said evenly, you feel more stable today because you've been on pain management and supportive therapy. But immediately before the transplant, your final blood work revealed 2 complications, an acute cardiac event and an infection that was not detected earlier. If we had proceeded with transplant surgery, you would have died on the table. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed as if she couldn't find words that fit a world where she didn't get what she wanted. Her eyes darted to Julian in panic, then to the nurse behind her, then back to the doctor as if her stare alone could make him reverse reality. Julian stepped forward, jaw tight, face pale but furious. And the kidney? He snapped, like that was the only word he could still control. What about the kidney? The doctor's gaze shifted from Beatrice to Julian, and something sharper entered it. A harvested organ can only survive outside the body for a limited window, he said. When the primary recipient is medically unfit, protocol requires the organ be offered to the next compatible patient on the Federal Registry. Julian's hands curled into fists. That organ was intended for my mother. We paid for the surgery. We. You paid for a procedure, the doctor interrupted coldly. You did not purchase a kidney. A human organ is not property. It cannot be held for your convenience. Sienna's hand flew to her mouth. Her red dress suddenly looked less like power and more like a warning sign. Julian's voice cracked, just slightly. So, where is it? I heard myself whisper before I even realized I was speaking. Where did my kidney go? The doctor turned to me, and his expression softened like he remembered I was the one bleeding under these sheets. The recipient gave permission for us to reveal his identity to the donor, he said gently. He specifically asked that you be told. My throat felt dry as dust. Who? The doctor held my gaze, then said the name like he was dropping a stone into deep water. Harrison Sterling. The room changed. Not in some dramatic movie way, with lightning and thunder, but in the way a predator suddenly realizes the prey it cornered belongs to a bigger predator. Julian's posture stiffened, then faltered. His eyes widened, and for the first time since he walked into my room with divorce papers, he looked afraid. I didn't know Harrison Sterling personally, but I knew the name the way people in Georgia know certain names. Sterling Development Group. The man whose money reshaped neighborhoods. The philanthropist whose foundation funded hospitals and scholarships and disaster relief. The man people called untouchable in the same breath they called him generous. There had been rumors he disappeared from public life because he was sick. Nobody knew what kind of sick. Now I did. Beatrice's lips trembled. That can't be, she started, but the sentence died in her throat because even she understood what that name meant. It meant influence. It meant lawyers who didn't lose. It meant hospitals that moved mountains when he asked. It meant that whatever power Julian thought he had in my hospital room was suddenly nothing. Julian tried to recover. He adjusted his cuff, forced a laugh that came out wrong. Doctor, he said, voice too polite now, too careful. Surely there's an exception. This is my mother's life. There must be. There is no exception, the doctor said flatly. And for the record, you should be grateful your wife signed a clause allowing the hospital to allocate the organ if the primary recipient became unfit. That clause is the reason we were legally protected from interference when we acted to save another patient's life. My brain latched onto that. The clause. The standard formality. The paper Julian had rushed me through because he wanted every possible outcome controlled. And now that same paper, his own arrogance, had created a door he couldn't close. Julian's expression shifted again, fast. His eyes flicked to me with new calculation, like he was recalculating my worth in real time. Imani, he said softly, stepping closer, voice warm like the man I thought I married. Listen. We were emotional. My mother is sick. Don't, I whispered, and my voice surprised me. It didn't sound weak. It sounded like steel wrapped in pain. Don't say my name like you still own it. Sienna stiffened beside him. She looked at Julian, then at me, then back at Julian, and the first crack of uncertainty showed in her eyes. She hadn't come here expecting a twist. She'd come here to watch me be discarded. Beatrice, however, was unraveling. You did this, she hissed at me, her face twisting like something rotten. You. She tried to lunge forward in her wheelchair, but the nurse behind her held the handles tight. You were supposed to save me. I stared at her, at this woman who had called me charity, who had smiled at my humiliation like it was entertainment. My side throbbed. My stomach rolled. But under the pain, something else rose, something I hadn't felt since I was a child. A fierce, protective rage. I didn't do anything, I said, each word slow because breathing hurt. I signed what you told me to sign. I did what your son demanded. If you want someone to blame, blame the man who used me like spare parts. Julian's face darkened. Watch your mouth, he snapped, and there it was, the real Julian again, the one who believed my gratitude should make me silent. The doctor stepped forward. That's enough, he said sharply. This patient is not to be subjected to stress. If you continue, I will call security and have you removed. Julian drew himself up. We're leaving, he said, and he tried one more time. He reached for my hand, like a man trying to reclaim the narrative with a touch. I yanked my hand away so fast it made my stitches scream. "Doctor," I said, voice shaking but clear. "Please call security. There are strangers in my room." The words felt unreal, like I was watching myself from a distance, but the moment they left my mouth, power shifted again. Because security isn't a discussion. It's a decision. Julian's eyes flashed. "Imani." "Now," the doctor repeated, and stepped into the hall. Within a minute, 2 security guards arrived. Their presence filled the room like a wall. Julian opened his mouth to argue, but one guard held up a hand. "Sir, you need to leave," he said. Julian tried to stand his ground. "I'm her husband." Sienna flinched at that word. Husband. It sounded ridiculous now. The guard didn't blink. "Not if she says you're not welcome." Beatrice began to curse, her voice rising into a high, ugly shriek. Ungrateful, dirty, trash. The nurse behind her wheeled her backward as she fought like a woman being dragged away from a throne she believed was hers. Sienna's heels clicked on linoleum, sharp and fast, but now the sound didn't feel powerful. It felt desperate. Julian was the last to go, and before he crossed the doorway, he turned back and looked at me, really looked at me, like he was trying to understand how the orphan girl he'd chosen because she had no one had suddenly become dangerous. "You're making a mistake," he said low. I stared back, my voice barely a whisper.
"No."
"I'm finally correcting one." The door shut, and silence poured into the room like relief. I lay there trembling. My whole body shook, partly from pain, partly from adrenaline, partly from the shock of finally saying no out loud. Tears ran down the sides of my face into my ears. I wasn't crying because I missed him. I was crying because grief is complicated and betrayal is violent, and my body had been cut open for people who treated me like garbage. The doctor returned and stepped to my bedside. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "No one should have done that to you." I stared at the ceiling again, the gray paint, the cracks, the harsh light, and I whispered, "I signed everything." "You were misled," he said. "But listen to me carefully. The hospital will protect you. And Mr. Sterling's team will protect you too if you want that." "Why would they?" I asked. "He doesn't know me." The doctor hesitated, then said, "Because you saved his life. And because he requested to meet you the moment you're stable enough." The next hour moved like a dream. Nurses came in, gentler now, as if word had already spread through the wing. My 4 was adjusted. My pain medication changed. The doctor ordered my transfer. I didn't even have the strength to argue. I just stared, numb, while my bed was rolled out of the ward into a quieter hallway, into an elevator that hummed upward, into a floor where everything smelled cleaner, calmer, softer. The executive suite looked like a different universe. A wide window with a view of the Atlanta skyline. A private bathroom with marble counters. A sofa that looked too expensive to sit on. A basket of fruit, fresh flowers, a TV larger than the entire wall of my old foster room. It was beautiful, and the beauty made me want to scream, because it proved how easily life could be improved if someone decided you mattered. A man in a dark suit arrived not long after. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, posture like discipline. He introduced himself as Marcus Whitaker, Chief of Staff for the Sterling Foundation. He didn't speak to me like I was charity. He spoke like I was a person who had just been through something brutal. "Miss Collier," he said, glancing at a tablet, "Mr. Sterling has instructed that all your medical expenses, recovery care, and living arrangements be covered for as long as necessary. He also asked me to tell you he always pays his debts." I swallowed. "I don't want money," I whispered. Marcus nodded like he'd expected that. "Then think of it as protection."
"And time."
"Time to heal and decide what you want next." "What I want," I said, voice breaking, "is to not be thrown away." Marcus's eyes softened. "Then you won't be." That night, I slept for the first time since surgery without waking up gasping. The next morning, the pain was still there, but something else was there too, the faintest sense of safety, like I'd been pulled out of a burning building and placed somewhere the fire couldn't reach. On day 6 post-op, a different visitor came in, A man with a folder and a calm, predatory confidence, like someone who lived in courtrooms and never lost. He introduced himself as Thomas Reed, head of legal affairs for Sterling Development Group. He didn't waste time with sympathy. He gave me something better, clarity. Imani, he said, flipping open the folder, I've reviewed your situation. Your husband filed for divorce while you were incapacitated. The timing alone raises serious ethical concerns, but he thinks he's protected by consent forms and your lack of family support. He chose the wrong target. My stomach tightened. He said I signed everything. You did, Thomas said. But signatures don't erase intent. And we aren't here to argue feelings. We're here to leverage facts. He slid a document toward me. During your marriage, Mr. Vane registered several assets in your name. I blinked. What assets? Thomas's mouth curved slightly. A warehouse property in Savannah. A stake in Vane Textiles. A commercial building in Midtown. And, yes, portions of the Alpharetta estate. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. It's very possible, Thomas said. Men like Julian do it to shield assets from creditors, tax liabilities, and business risks. They put things under the spouse's name because they assume the spouse will never leave, and even if she tries, she won't have the money to fight. My hands trembled beneath the blanket. So, what does that mean for me? It means, Thomas said carefully, that if you sign the divorce papers the way he wants, quickly, quietly, without contest, he may inadvertently forfeit his claim to assets legally held under your name. I stared at him, unable to breathe properly. You're saying I should sign? I'm saying, he corrected, you should consider playing the long game. Let him believe you're weak. Let him believe you're grateful for $10,000. Let him walk out thinking he won. My heart hammered. It felt wrong. It felt like lying. But then I remembered Julian's calm face as he dropped divorce papers onto my chest while I was still bleeding. I remembered Beatrice calling me used goods. I remembered Sienna's hand on her stomach like my pain was a joke. And something inside me whispered back. Thomas leaned in slightly. Mr. Sterling is not asking you to destroy anyone, he said. He's asking you to protect yourself. If you want justice, we can build a case. If you want independence, we can structure your exit. If you want revenge, he paused, eyes steady, that too can be arranged legally with precision. My throat tightened. Why is Mr. Sterling doing this? I asked again, because my mind couldn't accept kindness without a hook. Thomas closed the folder gently. Because you saved his life. Because he knows what predatory people do to the vulnerable. And because he hesitated, as if choosing words. He read your file. Your foster history. Your employment history. The way you navigated the world without support. He said you remind him of someone he lost. The room blurred with tears I didn't want. I don't want to be someone's pity project, I whispered. You won't be, Thomas said. You will be someone's investment in decency. There's a difference. After he left, I stared out the window at the city. Cars moved like tiny beads. People walked far below, living lives that had nothing to do with kidneys and betrayal and divorce papers. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unknown. Sign the papers. Don't get difficult. My skin went cold. A second later, another message. Unknown. You don't know who you're playing with. I stared at the screen, heartbeat thundering, and suddenly I knew Julian wasn't just cruel. He was scared. And scared men don't threaten unless they believe you can hurt them. I took screenshots. I forwarded them to Marcus Whitaker. Within 2 minutes, he replied, Understood. Your security is being upgraded today. Do not respond. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The suite felt luxurious, but fear can enter any room if it has your name. I forced myself to breathe through the pain in my side. And then, for the first time, I asked myself a question I never dared ask. What if I don't go back to being the orphan girl who accepts crumbs? That afternoon, the doctor, Dr. Bennett, I finally learned his name, visited to check my incision. He worked with professional calm, but his eyes carried something human. You did a brave thing, he said quietly. I did a stupid thing. I corrected. He met my gaze. Brave and stupid can look similar from the outside. The difference is what you do after you learn. I swallowed. What do I do after I learn? He hesitated, then said simply, "You choose yourself." That night, alone in the suite, I opened the brown envelope again. I read every line of the divorce petition. I read the legal language meant to erase me. I read the signatures. Julian's signature was steady and confident, like he didn't believe consequences applied to him. I picked up the pen.
And I signed.
Not because I was surrendering, not because I was afraid, but because I could finally see the trap hidden inside his own arrogance. Julian thought he was divorcing a powerless woman with no family. He thought he was severing the last thread that connected him to me. He didn't realize he was signing away the rope he'd used to control me, leaving it in my hands. I slid the papers into the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to Marcus Whitaker the next morning. He looked at me, approving but careful. "Once this is filed," he said, "things move quickly." "Good," I whispered. "Let them move." 2 days later, I got my first message from Julian himself. Not anonymous. Not threatening.
Soft.
"Imani, I'm sorry. We were overwhelmed. My mother's health." I didn't reply. The next message came an hour later.
"We can fix this. Please."
I still didn't reply. And that's when I understood. The moment he realized my kidney went to Harrison Sterling, Julian's plan collapsed. Because his entire scheme depended on me being disposable. The moment I became connected to power, I stopped being garbage to throw out and became a liability to manage. And Julian Vane did not know how to manage a woman who no longer begged. 3 weeks after surgery, when I could stand without dizziness, Marcus Whitaker told me, "Mr. Sterling is ready to meet you." My chest tightened. Why does that feel scarier than my husband? Marcus almost smiled. Because your husband is predictable. Mr. Sterling changes realities. They wheeled me to a rooftop garden above the clinic. The sun was warm. The air smelled like jasmine. And there, wrapped in a blanket on a wicker chair, sat Harrison Sterling, gray hair, sharp eyes, face still thin from illness, but presence so heavy it made the world feel smaller. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was reading the story written behind my eyes. "So," he said at last, voice rough but strong, "this is the woman who gave a part of herself to a demon and fate redirected that gift to me." I swallowed. I didn't mean for that to happen. He nodded once. That's what makes it valuable. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the years of being unwanted stacked inside me like bricks. Harrison Sterling watched me struggle, then he leaned forward slightly. "Imani," he said, and my name in his mouth didn't sound like ownership. It sounded like recognition. "Tell me one thing. What do you want now?" I stared at him, hands clenched around the blanket. My voice came out low, trembling but honest. "I want to make sure they never do this to anyone else again." Sterling's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in satisfaction. "Good," he said quietly. "Then you're ready to learn." And right then, as the skyline glittered behind him, I realized part one of my life was over. The part where I begged to belong. The part where I paid with blood for a seat at someone else's table. Part two was about something else entirely. It was about power. And I was done being powerless. Harrison Sterling did not begin by teaching me how to destroy anyone. That surprised me. I had walked into his world with my teeth clenched, my heart armored with rage, expecting lessons in retaliation, pressure points, and legal ambushes. Instead, he taught me something far more dangerous. He taught me how power actually works. Revenge, he told me on my 3rd day in the executive suite, as Atlanta glowed beneath the windows, is loud. Justice is quiet. Power is silent. He said it like a man who had lived long enough to watch enemies burn themselves down without him striking a single match. If you move from anger, you will always show your hand too early. If you move from clarity, they won't realize they're finished until they're already ruined. Recovery was brutal. Losing a kidney is not poetic. It is not cinematic. It is pain that wakes you up at night and reminds you of its existence when the weather changes. Physical therapy at dawn. Medication schedules. The slow, humiliating process of learning where your limits are now. Some mornings, my scar burned like a live wire. Some nights, exhaustion crushed me so completely I fell asleep with spreadsheets open on my tablet. And still, every morning I got up. Because for the first time in my life, the work was not about surviving. It was about becoming. Harrison insisted on structure. 5 a.m. meant physical rehab. 7 meant breakfast and the Wall Street Journal. He didn't spoon-feed explanations. He asked questions. Why did the tech sector dip? What does that do to real estate? Who benefits when a company pretends growth it doesn't have? When I didn't know, he waited. Silence, I learned, is a weapon. You either fill it with nonsense or you learn. From 9 to 3, I had private tutors. Corporate law, asset protection, market manipulation, not the illegal kind, but the kind that anticipates human behavior. From 4 to 7, I sat in on negotiations at Sterling Development. Real ones. Where people smiled and lied and smiled again, and no one raised their voice because raised voices meant weakness. At night, alone in my suite, I cried sometimes. Quietly. Into pillows that smelled like clean linen and wealth and safety. I cried for the girl who believed love was proven through pain. I cried for the child who thought silence was survival. And then I slept, and in the morning I stood back up. The outside changes came quickly. My hair, once worn long and careful, was cut into a sharp, elegant bob. My clothes shifted from softness to structure, tailored suits, clean lines, nothing that invited pity. But the real change was in my eyes.
People noticed that first.
The way I listened. The way I paused before speaking. The way I no longer rushed to fill space with apologies. 4 months after my surgery, Thomas Reed brought me the divorce update. Finalized, he said, placing the decree on the table between us. Single session. No contest. Mr. Vane did exactly what we expected. I looked at the paper, the official stamp, Julian's name reduced to ink and history. I felt nothing. No triumph. No grief. Just closure. He believes he won, Thomas continued. He thinks he walked away with $10,000 and a scar. He hasn't asked questions about asset division. He's too busy trying to save his company. Good, I said calmly. Let him stay busy. Because Julian was unraveling. Beatrice's health declined fast after the failed transplant. Dialysis 3 times a week. Cardiac complications. The bills were catastrophic, over $50,000 a month just to keep her stable. Julian started selling assets. First the Porsche, then the G-Wagon, then pieces of his art collection. He still lived like a man pretending nothing was wrong, but desperation leaks. Suppliers began asking questions. Vendors demanded cash. His once polished reputation started to show cracks. Then came the wedding announcements. Julian and Sienna were planning a spectacle. 500 guests. A designer gown flown in from Milan. Rings commissioned from a jeweler known only to Atlanta's elite. It was obscene. A declaration that Julian still mattered, that he was still powerful, that he had replaced me with something shinier and fertile. Harrison read the report, then looked at me over his glasses. Are you ready? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes. We created Phoenix Investments in less than a week. Delaware registration. Nominee directors. No visible connection to Sterling Development. Clean, attractive, mysterious. The kind of firm struggling businesses dream about when they're drowning. We didn't approach Julian directly. We let the rumor mill do the work. Whispers in the right circles. Hints at a black-tie investor gala. A discreet courier delivered the invitation to Julian's office. Heavy paper, gold embossing, subtle language about strategic partnerships. Julian didn't ask why a firm like Phoenix would be interested in Vane Textiles. He didn't ask who was behind it. He only saw salvation. The gala took place at the top floor of the Westin Peachtree Plaza. Glass, light, crystal. The kind of room where deals were made, because everyone assumed the environment guaranteed legitimacy. Julian stood at the bar adjusting his cufflinks, scanning the room like a man trying to look confident while calculating his debts. Harrison Sterling took the stage briefly. The room hushed. He spoke about innovation, resilience, and second chances. Then he smiled slightly. "Allow me to introduce the new CEO of Phoenix Investments," he said. "My associate, Amani Sterling." The room turned. I descended the stairs in an emerald silk gown, my posture straight, my expression composed. A diamond necklace, Harrison's gift after I completed my training, rested at my throat. I didn't look for Julian. I didn't need to. I felt him before I saw him. The sound of glass shattering cut through the murmur. Sienna had dropped her champagne flute. Julian stood frozen, his face drained of color, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost that had learned to walk and speak and own the room. "That's impossible," Sienna whispered, gripping his sleeve. "We need to leave.
Now."
Julian shook her off. "Wait," he said, eyes locked on me. "She loved me once." I turned as he approached, my smile polite and empty. "I'm sorry," I said lightly when he said my name. "Do we know each other?" His mouth opened, closed. "Imani. It's me, Julian." I tilted my head.
"Ah,
"Mr. Vane. Yes, my analyst prepared your file. Falling revenue. Inflated contracts. Severe cash flow issues. Interesting case." I glanced at my watch. "Come to my office Monday. Strictly business." Hope lit his face like a disease. Monday, Julian sat at the far end of a long conference table. Lawyers, analysts, auditors surrounded him. His forged reports lasted 6 minutes. That was all it took to dismantle months of lies. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "Phoenix Investments is prepared to offer a $2 million convertible loan." Julian looked up, stunned. "Collateralized," I continued calmly, "by all company shares and the borrower's personal assets. Sales targets must be met within 3 months. Failure triggers immediate transfer of ownership." He signed without hesitation. After he left, Thomas Reed smiled openly for the first time. "He just pledged assets that legally belong to you," he said. "That's bank fraud. Federal." "And the targets?" I asked. "Impossible," Thomas replied. "We've already pressured his distributors." The next file arrived a week later. Sienna Thorne. Photos. Bank transfers. Medical records. I read it without emotion. 20 weeks pregnant, I said quietly. Julian was in New York during conception. "Correct," Marcus Whitaker confirmed. "The child isn't his." "Good," I said, closing the folder. "Then everything will collapse at once." Julian invited me to dinner 2 nights later. Historic mansion. Candles. Music. Regret carefully rehearsed. "My mother pushed me," he said, voice low and earnest. "Sienna was a mistake. I'm ready to leave her. Put my mother in a home. Anything to have you back." The recorder in my purse captured every word. "I'll think about it," I said, standing. "Enjoy your dinner." 3 months ended in mid-March. Phoenix Investments arrived at Vane Textiles with security and federal agents. The audit exposed empty warehouses, ghost contracts, non-existent vendors. "FBI is in the lobby," Thomas said calmly. "Wire fraud. Bank fraud." Julian ran. He raced to the hospital to see his mother one last time. Instead, he found Sienna stuffing his watches and cufflinks into a bag.
"Leaving," she snapped.
"Before the feds get here." Then I walked in. White suit.
Calm. Silent.
I dropped the folder. Photos spilled across the floor. Julian's face contorted as he read. "The baby," he choked. "It's not mine." "Typo," I said. "You're type A, basic genetics." He struck her. I played the recording. Beatrice heard everything. Her monitor screamed. She reached for me. "Help me, daughter." I looked at her hand. "My kidney was a gift of love," I said softly. "I would have given it to the mother I lost at 9. You are not my mother." The monitor flatlined. I walked out. 2 days later, Julian was arrested at his mother's funeral. Handcuffs closed around his wrists as the casket lowered. From a black Mercedes at the edge of the cemetery, I watched without triumph. The aftermath did not arrive with fireworks or applause. It came quietly, the way real endings usually do, slipping into my life like a tide that recedes after a storm and leaves the shoreline forever changed. Julian's arrest made a brief, hungry circuit through the business pages. Phrases like financial misconduct, wire fraud, and misrepresentation replacing the polished language he once wore like a tailored suit. His company collapsed under audits that found nothing solid beneath the glossy reports. Accounts froze. Partnerships dissolved. Friends who had once toasted him at rooftop bars stopped answering calls. The wedding never happened. The venue canceled. The designer dress returned. The jeweler demanded payment. Sienna disappeared into the legal fog of her own choices, the truth about the pregnancy catching up with her faster than any flight could carry her away. And Beatrice, whose voice had once filled rooms with contempt, became a footnote in hospital records and a silence that no money could buy back. When the dust settled, there was no grand speech, no dramatic confrontation left to stage. There was just me, standing in the quiet that follows justice, realizing that revenge had never been the point. Survival had been.
Dignity had been.
And now, finally, so was peace. I returned to my own apartment after months in the executive suite, not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the ground again under my feet. The place felt smaller than I remembered, but it also felt honest. The scar on my side tugged when I bent to unpack, a reminder written in my body of where I had been and what I had paid. I no longer hated it. I no longer touched it with shame. It was proof that I had been chosen as disposable and refused to stay that way, proof that I had been cut open by betrayal and stitched myself back together with knowledge. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, and when I woke without dread. The messages stopped. The threats evaporated. Power, I learned, does not need to announce itself once it is established. It simply changes the weather around you. Harrison Sterling never treated me like a trophy or a charity case. He treated me like a responsibility, one he took seriously. He did not flatter, he challenged. He did not promise safety, he taught awareness. We met often, sometimes in his office, sometimes walking slowly through gardens where he spoke about mistakes that had cost him fortunes and relationships and years. He spoke about patience as a discipline and restraint as a weapon. He spoke about generosity as a strategy that outlives anger. When he offered to formalize our connection, papers, mentorship, a shared name on letterhead, I understood it was not ownership but alignment. I accepted with clear eyes, knowing that strength borrowed becomes weakness if you do not learn to generate your own. Under his guidance, I built that muscle day by day, decision by decision, until I could sit across from people who once would have made me shrink and feel nothing but clarity. The assets Julian thought he had hidden became tools I used carefully, responsibly, without spectacle. I did not strip them for pleasure. I stabilized them, sold what needed selling, reinvested what could grow. The warehouse in Savannah became a logistics hub that hired people at fair wages. The Midtown property was converted into offices that funded scholarships for students aging out of foster care, students who, like me once, needed more than encouragement. They needed doors opened with keys that worked. I did not do this to look virtuous. I did it because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and invisibility is a wound that multiplies when ignored. Giving back, I learned, was not about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let the past decide who deserved a future. There were moments, quiet ones, private ones, when grief returned wearing a new face. Not grief for Julian, but grief for the woman I had been when I believed pain was the price of love. I let myself mourn her properly. I thanked her for surviving when survival was all she knew. And then I let her rest. The woman I am now does not trade blood for belonging. She does not accept contracts disguised as affection. She reads the fine print, on paper and in people. She understands that loyalty demanded is rarely loyalty returned, and that consent without context is just another word predators hide behind. These lessons did not make me cold. They made me precise. I visited my parents' graves in Macon on a mild afternoon, the sky wide and forgiving. I placed white lilies on the stone and spoke to them softly, telling them that their daughter had finally learned how to stand without bracing for a blow. I told them about the work I was doing, about the people who had found their footing because someone had bothered to see them. I told them about the scar and how it no longer hurt the way it once did. The wind moved through the trees, and for the first time since I was 9, the silence there felt companionable instead of empty. When Dr. Bennett joined me on the path with 2 cups of coffee, it felt ordinary in the best way. He did not ask for gratitude or heroism. He asked about my health, about my plans, about what came next. We spoke like equals, like 2 people who had seen something hard and decided not to become harder for it. When he asked me to dinner, no white tablecloths, no pretense, I said yes, without overthinking, because discernment does not mean closing every door. It means opening the right ones with intention. At sunset, as we walked back toward the city, the sky burned gold and then softened into blue. I felt the weight of the day lift from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring meetings and decisions and responsibility, but tonight belonged to something simpler. The quiet certainty that I had crossed a threshold and did not need to look back to know where I had been. The world would not always be kind. I knew that. But I also knew this. I no longer mistook cruelty for love, urgency for truth, or sacrifice for worth. I had learned to choose myself, not at the expense of others, but in alignment with them. And as the light faded and the city breathed around me, I understood that rising is not a moment. It is a practice, one I would